Welcome, everybody. I am Robbie Feinberg. I'm a reporter at Maine Public, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second of our 3 Age of Nature tiny screen lectures. And this one is called Flow, the Ripple Effect of Restoring the Nature of Rivers in Maine. We want to give a huge thank you to our partners and supporters who've made this series possible. And so we've got the Nature Conservancy in Maine, the Maine Education Association, and the Maine Mathematics and Science Alliance. So thank you all so much. And of course, to all of our Maine Public members. So thank you all so much. We couldn't do these events without all of you, all of our supporters. Yeah, really from around the state. So thanks so much. And just as an FYI, the Age of Nature documentary series that premieres on Wednesday, October 14th, and that'll be on Maine Public Television, and it'll cover a lot of the topics that we'll discuss here today. I'll say I got a sneak peek. I got to see a little bit of one of the episodes of the documentary series, and it's really great. It's really thought-provoking. I give it, based on that, my seal of approval, but I hope that you all obviously tune in and watch beginning on the 14th. And now on to our guest today. I'm pleased to have these experts who've taken the time to participate in our panel. We have Molly Payne-Wynn. She's the Freshwater Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Maine. We have Joshua Royt. He is a Senior Conservation Scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Maine. And we have Sean Mahoney. He's the Executive Vice President of the Conservation Law Foundation and the Director of their Maine office. And before we go any further, Molly from the Nature Conservancy, she'll read a land acknowledgement statement to start us off.
We're here today to discuss the history, present, and future of Maine's rivers. And to do so, we must first acknowledge the legacy and ongoing roles of the people of the Wabanaki Confederacy. If you're tuning in from somewhere in Maine today, as I am on the Mid-Coast, you're doing so from the ancestral homeland of the Wabanaki people. The lands and waters of Maine have been their home for thousands of years, and yet today the 4 tribes in Maine, the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy, known collectively as the Wabanaki, maintain the ability to steward less than 1% of their homeland. Here, as in many places around the world, Indigenous people have continually been denied the opportunity to participate in meaningful ways in the decisions that affect their traditional lands, waters, and livelihoods. Today and throughout these Age of Nature presentations and discussions, we recognize and pay respect to the Wabanaki people and acknowledge their deep and ongoing connection to the future of Maine's lands, waters, and communities.
Great, thank you so much, Molly. And now on to our featured speaker, Laura Rose Day. Laura, she became president and CEO of the Seven Lakes Alliance in September 2018, bringing in-depth and diverse experiences in watershed management to the Belgrade Lakes community. Laura has most recently served providing strategic consulting expertise on conservation issues as a principal in Source to Sea Consulting LLC. And for the 13 years prior, she served as the executive director of the Penobscot River Restoration Trust. And that's the nonprofit that was formed to lead an historic multi-party effort to restore nearly 2,000 miles of sea-run fish habitat while maintaining energy production. Laura also served as director of the Natural Resources Council of Maine's Watershed program. She helped to develop and direct Maine Rivers, which is a statewide watershed organization, and she serves on Maine Woods Forever and the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. Laura has degrees in wildlife management and in law. Thank you so much, and welcome, Laura.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and especially to join with folks on our panel who I worked with for many years to accomplish some of the work that you're going to see described here today. Really, I think my key role here is to share some of the work has been done in Maine to bring our rivers back to life. At the turn of the century, with the industrialization of rivers, particularly in the Northeast, the nature of Maine's rivers changed really almost entirely. From healthy, free-flowing rivers that were full of fish and wildlife, the rivers and the landscape that supported the Wabanaki people that Molly acknowledged in the beginning of the presentation. And industrialization essentially changed everything. In particular, pollution, log drives, chemicals, and dams nearly destroyed what we had here in terms of natural resources. And that was done in the interest of supporting the new society here. European settlement created communities up and down our rivers. There were sewage treatment plants, there were factories that produced chemicals for all of the things that, that people started using, which hadn't been on our landscape before. So that included log drives. We had a tremendous forestry industry, and we still have forestry industry, of course, in the state of Maine, but logs used to be driven down our rivers. And you can see on the left-hand side an article in the New York Times that talks about the end of log drives in Maine, which didn't happen, unbelievably, until 1976. This is an article from the cover of the New York Times talking about the end of those log drives. And of course, as you can imagine, log drives ended up putting a lot of bark, organic matter that ended up consuming oxygen, which was bad for fish, and caused all kinds of problems in rivers, including navigability. You couldn't exactly, as you can see from the picture here, do much on a river when it was full of logs during a log drive. Pollution from factories soiled our rivers. There are really pretty horrifying stories that are really hard to imagine today of rivers turning different colors when tanneries, for instance, would be coloring. They would be producing different colors for cloth, and literally a river would run red or blue or some other color, depending on the dye that the tannery was using at the time. And this was really a common occurrence. Factories would put the debris from poultry farms, and I think it's important for us to remember today that it wasn't that long ago, a short number of decades, when our rivers were experiencing this kind of pollution. And also that it was Edmund Muskie of Maine who was instrumental in getting the Clean Water Act passed. And that was one of the ways that Maine really led the way for the nation in cleaning up our rivers. But dams were the other remaining issue. And you're looking here at a map that shows a combination of locations of dams, passage projects designed to let fish migrate up and down rivers, and all kinds of road and culvert crossings. So in addition to the large dams that you think of going across a large waterway, we also have thousands of culverts and different kinds of structures in small streams to larger streams that block fish migration. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. So why do we care about dams and rivers? Dams have a number of impacts, but I show you this slide for a couple of reasons. In the Northeast, including Maine, our ecosystem, so all of the life that's interconnected in our river systems and into our lakes, and then feeds all of the surrounding wildlife and people, are driven by alewives and fish in the herring family, alewives and bluebacks and American shad. And they are literally what former commissioner of our Department of Marine Resources called the you know, the food, the Purina dog chow, he used to say, of the sea. And these are fish, about a dozen species, that have to travel between the ocean and inland habitat upstream in our upstream in our rivers, in what are called the headwaters, in order to survive. Most of them spawn upstream, and they do that in different cycles depending on the species. Maybe a 4-year cycle, it might be a 1-year cycle. But essentially, if they can't travel between the ocean and inland habitat, they simply can't survive. So when we interrupt a river's flow, we block fish. We've talked a little bit about that. And beyond simply keeping them from getting to their spawning habitat, they also end up unable to escape their predators. Rather than migrating in the company of millions of other fish, they end up stranded, disconnected by dams, chopping rivers up, and they're much more vulnerable to predation. Dams slow rivers. So not only does that cause problems for how fish migrate, but it also causes stagnant water with lower oxygen levels. And you can go, there are lots of sources, Nature Conservancy, American Rivers, many others, where you can read volumes about the problems that the stagnation of rivers can cause for fish. Habitat is changed. For instance, material from rivers usually moves from headwaters down to separate different sizes of cobble, so small rocks or sand or large boulders. And when they drop out, they create different kinds of habitat for different fish. When you stop that process, you cause really dramatic changes in how the river functions for those fish. And then when those fish don't survive, nor do the birds and mammals that need to eat the fish. And then water quality damage in general, this can range from warming water, where you'll get serious algal blooms. We see that just in the Belgrade Lakes region this summer, there was an algal bloom in a lake, and that traveled through a river, and that connects two ponds, and you could very much see what we're talking about here. And then decreased oxygen levels in general. So I want to start talk about a couple of examples where we in Maine recognized this problem and decided to do something about it. So at the turn of the century, there were dams in nearly every place where the water level dropped and you could produce power. They were used for mills, and eventually they were used for electrical power generation. And one of those dams was on the Kennebec River, not very far from the capital, just in Augusta. The Edwards Dam in the 70s had a breach. Some fish got upstream, and some grassroots folks in a local chapter of Trout Unlimited thought, fish are getting up the river as they're supposed to. It would be great if we could, get these dams, which get a license from the federal government, to have fish passage, or even better, be removed so fish could travel up the river. Long story short is this was the first dam in the country that for which the federal government denied a license because the ecological benefits of allowing fish up and down the river far exceeded any energy benefit that came from the dam. And that's a question that had really not been asked before. Dams are fixtures in communities, and people really don't, they think that they're there forever. People didn't used to really think very much about the possibility of having the fishery back. So Edwards Dam set a precedent that in fact this could be done, and it was done through a grassroots movement. And you see on the top the Edwards Dam in the river, and below the river as it looks today, without the dam in it. And there was just a celebration this past year of 2 decades of this dam being out of the river, and the fish have rebounded tremendously. And this is, sorry, the picture is a little bit blurry, but this is a picture of the dam just moments after the breach. So you can see here where the river started running through for the first time in over 160 years. And not long after, the fish that needed to migrate, sturgeon, salmon, shad, herring, were all moving upriver. This is a personal picture for me. This is my husband, and this is my son, Sam, who is now in his mid-20s. And he was at the celebration of the river rebounding just this past year. And so that gives you an idea of how long, we think of things as being static, but when you remove a dam and you allow 2 decades and as 2 decades pass, the river is resilient and it can come back really in a way that we never imagined before about 20 years ago. So this is the state of Maine with the Penobscot River watershed highlighted. And these dots are dams. So this will tell you, despite the fact that we've made some progress, how many dams still remain. So this is a photo looking upstream of the Penobscot River toward the headwaters. This happens to be the Howland Dam, which is at the top of the lower watershed. And you can see how much forested habitat full of streams and very high quality habitat for fish that absent all of the dams in the lower river, the fish would be able to access. They had not been able to because, as you can see here, from the mouth of the river, this was the Vesey Dam, significant dam about 21 feet high. Above it, the Great Works Dam. Above it, the Milford Dam, and above it, the Howland Dam. All of these between the ocean and the habitat that you just saw. But having seen what was accomplished with the Edwards Dam removal, folks got together from many different backgrounds, hydropower companies, conservation organizations, the Penobscot Nation. The Penobscot Nation's current reservation is here on the river. And so as you can see with these dams in the river, literally the fish that the Penobscot Nation used to have access to and which are guaranteed, they have a sustenance fishing right that's guaranteed to them by treaty, could not reach the reservation. So people got together, inspired by Edwards, and said, what might we do on the Penobscot that would bring back the fish and also maintain energy generation, restore opportunities for Penobscot Nation to have a meaningful cultural practices and restore the ecology of the river. And the plan was, and this is in fact what was implemented, to remove the lower two dams entirely, put a fish elevator at the remaining dam here at Milford, and at Howland, which was significantly upstream, as you can see, to put a nature-like bypass. And this is actually what has now been implemented. It was completed in 2016. When you open a river up in that way, it is truly remarkable what you will see. These are sturgeon that are now seen above both the Edwards Dam and the Vesey Dam. This happens to be on the Kennebec River, but the same species, Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeon, on both rivers and on most of our rivers. These are alewives. When I talked earlier about migrating fish hiding from their predators in the middle of masses of migrating fish, you can see what I mean. If you're a young salmon smolt, you may know that salmon in Maine, wild salmon are an endangered species, and there are lots of efforts going into trying to recover them. And if you're a young salmon smolt and you're about 1 foot long and you're trying to pass from the ocean upland and back again, being in the midst of all of these alewives would be rather helpful to you. There is a salmon, and these are all photos of life that has rebounded in the river. Lampreys, an eagle with a lamprey in its talons. Birds benefit from restored fisheries, and this is an osprey with some alewives in his or her talons. There are lots of life forms that we don't even think about or even often see. This is a freshwater mussel, which recover in free-flowing rivers. The Alewife Floater is a mussel that is very diminished in numbers in Maine because alewives don't get into the waters where these alewives are transported on the gills of alewives. And if alewives don't get up into the upper habitat, nor do the mussels. And mussels are tremendous filter feeders, and they are great for water quality and are abundant in clean, fresh water. Mammals all thrive in areas where the water is free flowing and oxygenated, and where fish can pass. And of course, benefits are tremendous for people. Boating, fishing, all of these fish feed ocean fisheries, which of course is, generate billions of dollars for the Maine economy. These are some statistics, I won't spend much time on them, of how fish have recovered in the Penobscot. But if you I'll just point you to this graph on the bottom, and this gives you an idea from pre-dam removal to post-dam removal, how dramatic the increase in species is. And we see that across many of the species. It's a celebration of the renewal of the Penobscot River. And to show you just some of the mechanics, this is the Great Works Dam. Bulldozers and trucks and engineers, contractors can rebuild a river by removing a dam, just as they can build dams in the first place. So this is just another way to generate jobs, and not only in the immediate removal of dams, but also all of the jobs that are generated in the future by tourism and recreation and fisheries. This is the VZ Dam before. That's the VZ Dam. Above is before removal, obviously, and after with the free-flowing river. Fish now able to go from the ocean all the way up to the Milford Dam through a lift that's very effective, and then up to the headwaters of the Penobscot River. It's really important that we remember to be respectful as human beings who are interacting with this incredible state of rivers and nation of rivers that we have. It's important that we involve youth. It's important that we engage people who have a memory of living rivers so that we can bring that forward into the future. Maine is led by example through Edwards, then the Penobscot, and many other dam removals that you can find with an easy search. But I wanted to share with you that about 1,600, more than that, dams have been removed since the beginning of the century, and most of them have occurred after the removal of the Edwards Dam. And the Edwards Dam removal here in Maine and the recovery of the river is widely regarded as sort of the inspiration for river recovery, not just in Maine, but throughout the world. There are lots of other opportunities still. There are still, more than 1,000 dams in Maine, and the St. Croix River, which used to have the largest alewife runs in the state, is just one of many opportunities that still exist in Maine. So to wrap up, the lessons that rivers teach us for the future: rivers work when we let them do what they do naturally. Nature is complex. It's very resilient given time. Rivers can rebound. I'm currently on the board of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which was inspired by the Penobscot and Edwards projects and the recovery that we've had here in Maine. And for every river, there's sort of a different formula, and it's important to involve many different kinds of people in figuring out what the right answer is for each place. Rivers teach us to think outside the box. Sometimes we can take incremental steps, and sometimes we need to make large-scale change on a river for it to come back, and we've been able to do that in Maine. And rivers teach us to take the long view. If you talk to people who lived on the Kennebec and the Penobscot and who remember it from 40 years ago, the river is like a different being. We need to be able to look to the future and be bold enough to fix the problems that we created in the past, and to create a new future for generations that are now coming up, and the people who are going to inherit this earth and the rivers that are its lifeblood. So with that, I'm going to end and turn it back over.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for that. That was so informative and enlightening, and I'm sure, yeah, all of our participants here really appreciated it. And now I'd like to open this up, to our panel. Before I do, though, I would like to ask everybody who is listening, watching at home, if you have any questions, or if you're listening to this panel, or you have any questions from what you just heard, feel free to post in the Zoom group chat. I'm going to try to get to as many of those as possible over the course of the next half an hour or so. And so to start off, we have this really wonderful group here of panelists. And what I would love to do, if I could just have everybody on the panel introduce themselves, just talk a little bit about yourself and your organization, where we're just going to start right there. And so I want to start with Molly Payne-Wynn from the Nature Conservancy in Maine.
Great, thank you. Struggling with the mute button for a minute. I'm so excited to be here today, and glad to see so many people joining and taking time out of your busy day. I'm especially excited to be here with Laura and Josh, whom I've spent many hours working with, and we don't get to see each other very often anymore, and especially not in person, so I'm glad to be here. I'm the Freshwater Program Director with the Nature Conservancy in Maine. The Nature Conservancy is in fact a global organization, and we work in over 70 countries worldwide. The Maine chapter in particular was founded in part by Rachel Carson, and we really continue to be led by her deep belief in the study of ecological science and taking action for the planet. The Nature Conservancy's vision is a world where a diversity of life thrives and people act to conserve nature for its own sake, but also for its ability to enrich our lives. Our main freshwater program focuses on statewide restoration of connectivity between the Gulf of Maine and priority rivers, lakes, ponds, and headwater streams throughout the state. And we mostly do that starting with the restoration of native sea run and resident fish. As Laura mentioned, this has a direct benefit for freshwater and marine food webs, but also importantly, it has a lot of benefits to local human communities. So in our freshwater program, we work on everything from replacing undersized culvert structures to allow streams to function more naturally and resiliently. We do public policy engagement. We participate and support research, monitoring native fish populations, building opportunities for citizen engagement in these efforts and citizen science, and then ultimately translating our work done here in Maine to the budding global river restoration movement. And we work with many, many partners, both federal, state, non-governmental organizations to make this work happen at the scale that's needed in our state. And just quickly on a personal note, I grew up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and being on and near and in the water became such an important part of who I am as a person. I've been working in Maine since 2010. I started my career working with Laura on the Penobscot River Restoration Project. And I'm just thrilled that I get to play even a small part to maintain the health of Maine's rivers every day.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Molly. And now let's hear from Joshua Roy, who's also with the Nature Conservancy in Maine.
Great. Thanks, Robbie. And thanks, Laura, for that really wonderful presentation from someone who lived that project from the very beginning through its continued successes. It's wonderful to hear that story. And I became connected with that story sort of midway from its conception to its implementation when the Nature Conservancy joined after a really fascinating science forum that the trust, Penobscot River Restoration Trust, presented, and realized that we really needed to think about these systems and how we're going to monitor them and how we're going to connect people to this project, which is really changing the way we look at the planet, the way we look at our rivers from what they've been historically to what they can be in the future. So exciting for me from my 22-year career with the Nature Conservancy. I'm senior scientist now, and my work focuses largely on freshwater, and the lessons that we've learned from Penobscot have really expanded around the state of Maine to work that I'm doing, helping the European Union with rivers, and something called World Fish Migration Day, which is really getting people around the planet to sort of get the buzz, the excitement of what we've learned with our rivers in Maine, that when you open them up, they thrive, and they're so beautiful and exciting and productive. And this has implications not only for our hearts and souls and soulless, but also for our economies and our society and the various cultures around the state. So it's exciting to be a part of it. My work with rivers started from a basic ecological landscape sort of perspective to really a summer job that a cousin suggested I apply for this job in California, which was exciting enough to me as a college kid. And it turned out to be on the headwaters of the Klamath River that Laura is now an advisor, project manager for. So it was removing log drive dams and removing logs that had piled up from logging on the steep slopes and creating new habitat for steelhead and restoring that resource to the First Nations up there. So super exciting work. I never thought that my job would turn to river restoration in Maine and global work, but I have to say it's extraordinary work with amazing hope for the future, and I'm super glad to be a part of this process, and to have this kind of work during our lifetimes right now is fantastic. I see my video is stuttering, so I'm going to turn it off just in case that's translating to my audio. But thanks, Robbie, and I think maybe Sean is up next.
Yeah, and you're sounding good now. So, but feel free to come back if you feel like your internet starts working better or something. And now I'll turn it over to Deshawn Mahoney with the Conservation Law Foundation.
Hi, thanks, Robbie, and hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and I'll keep it short because I'd love to hear the questions and comments that folks have. It was a great presentation from Laura, and it's a real pleasure. She's a huge leader in the river restoration work here in Maine, and it's great to see some other folks on here. I see Dick Anderson is on, former commissioner of IF&W, who was a big mover and shaker in helping to move forward with Edwards and a bunch of other dams. Conservation Law Foundation are environmental advocates, a lot of lawyers based in New England, and have been involved in a number of administrative and court cases to try and move the effort for river restoration forward. A lot of dams are permitted by the Federal Energy Resource Commission, and they need to get licenses, which Laura talked about. So there are real opportunities when these dams get relicensed to start rethinking, is the dam necessary? And how can you make the dam more amenable to the river's other values than just power generation? And there's also a lot of dams that aren't licensed by the federal government. And Maine actually has a unique law that allows citizens to petition the state to get the dam owners to either install fishway into those dams or to remove the dams in order to do river restoration. And that's something that I've been lucky enough to be involved with. I live on the banks of the Penobscot River, where both of those things have come to pass. And the Penobscot River, which stretches 40 miles from Sebago Lake to Casco Bay, where I am, I'm 6 miles from the city of Portland, but I could be anywhere in Maine, in western or northern Maine. Osprey, eagles, there's shad, and the blueback run has returned incredibly since the river's been opened up, and there's lots more to do. But very excited to be here and to hear what people have to say and what their comments and questions are. Thanks, Robbie.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all. And I kind of want to start with a question that may seem, a little, stupid about this, but I wanted to start with, when hearing about both the Edwards Dam project and then also the work at the Penobscot River restoration. Obviously, as Laura just talked about, these were, kind of pioneering efforts and were really kind of models for the world. Is there a reason why this kind of work started in Maine? Is there something about the state or the work that's gone on here? I guess I'll let anybody start.
Come on, Robbie, it's Maine, of course. A year ago, we lead.
Well,
Is that the simple answer? Yeah, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that part of it is that we're in Maine and we have a tremendous tradition in the state of connection with our natural resources. And I suppose, you know, people in any state would say that, but we really do still have a very high percentage of resource intensive industry. And when I say intensive, I mean not just you know, sort of consumptive, but that we have you know, we have tourism, we have our tremendous ocean fisheries, and certain ocean fisheries, such as our cod fishery, have taken devastating hits from the elimination of alewife runs, for instance. So there's been some great work by a fellow whose name is Ted Ames that show that nearshore cod fisheries, they just started disappearing when the alewife runs disappeared. And so where there used to be in fishing by commercial fisheries inshore certain times of the year, because of the intersection between alewife runs and the cod at the coast, those evaporated. And there are all kinds of things like that that we can think of. You know, the lakes in Maine have, you know, tremendous, you know, bring tremendous value to tourism and fishing in general in all of our rivers and lakes and ponds. So I do think that there was a big focus on, you know, is this really the way it should be? Given that we're really reliant on our natural resources, should we maybe rethink how we do this? And maybe it was just serendipity, but that the Edwards Dam had a breach, which allowed fish to pass and sparked in some grassroots folks' minds this vision that things could be different. And we're fortunate to have the laws that we do, both the Clean Water Act that was pioneered by Edmund Muskie, which cleaned up the rivers, and also, you know, Sean referred to the dam process that we have for power generating dams. The licensing process is designed to allow citizen input. So that's how the Edwards Dam was removed, was because the people not only had that vision, but with, again, Mainers' sort of independent thinking and determination, they were able to take that case really all the way. You know, the license was denied for the Edwards Dam, but also that was challenged by industry. That was by no means an easy case. It went to the Supreme Court and it was upheld. So I do think that there's something about the fact that we have so many dams. They've had such a tremendous impact. They are so related to the things that sustain us, and maybe something about Mainers' personalities. I'll leave that for others. Will have their own opinions about that, but I think so.
Yeah, I would second that too. We have other things going on here that don't exist in other places. We have both Sean and Laura mentioned our amazing resources, and you know, with the Nature Conservancy, when we started looking at river connectivity, we did an assessment of all the dams in the northeastern United States. And as you look at where there's amazing habitat that is natural cover, forest, when you look at where the fish that used to be there still around, all 12 of our sea-run species are still here. And when you look at the miles of habitat for the number of dams, there's no better place to put your money than the state of Maine in order to get habitat back. And these very same lessons are being leveraged around the world, really, through our work and partners' work of where are the best opportunities because of all those factors. The fish are there or could be there. The opportunities are there with dams and regulations and government supporting it and policy. And then you've got, you know, a wealth of habitat that either is good right now or could easily be restored. So even though our rivers took it on the chin for a long time, rivers are amazing in that, just as Laura said, they come back. It's phenomenal. It flushes out, the habitat restores itself, all the aquatic insects, the whole chain of life restores itself. And we're super lucky. And so our example here leverages excitement in Maine so that we're doing a lot of restoration here, but it's really having an impact around the world, which is super exciting.
And I just add that, as Laura noted earlier in her presentation, the state of Maine had basically turned its back on its rivers, and they were either used for dumping grounds or for log drives. And once the Clean Water Act, and sponsored by Senator Muskie, came into play and increased the water quality, improved the water quality by regulating what you could dump into our rivers, and eventually getting rid of the log drives. Now you had cleaner water where you actually could have the fish actually survive because there was enough oxygen and there was enough clean water and food. That made it possible to be rethinking how we're using the rivers. And so when these dams were coming up for relicensing, and people could rethink, okay, we went through that industrial age. What can we use these rivers for best now? And I think we had some great leadership from state government, people in the state planning office, Steve Brook, and others in the state planning office, a governor who was willing to really step out and do this, a federal government that was willing to do it. So things really came together. And we're lucky it did, because as Josh and Laura have both said, it really set the example for lots of other states and countries.
Great. So I feel like I could have a million more questions just about this, but we're already getting so many questions in the chat that I'm just going to turn it over to that, looking at the time. So one of the questions that did stand out to me when thinking about this, and I'm seeing from Ed Dam, he's asking just about like the future of hydroelectric power and dams in Maine. I guess just how are we thinking through that right now, and what future do dams and hydroelectric power have? Whoever wants to start.
Well, there was a follow-up question too. It's sort of like, why don't we take them all out? And the truth of the matter is, dams are always bad for rivers. There's always going to be a disruption of the flow of nutrients or sediment, and certainly fish and other wildlife along it. So these systems are going to suffer on either side of the dam. You have to say, when we look at Maine, we have a lot of hydropower in headwaters above where a lot of these sea-run fish got to. So if there's going to be hydropower anyway, it really shouldn't be in these lower rivers with these sea-run fish. And if there's some in these headwaters, is it still damaging rivers? Yes, but it's a lot less damage than a lot of the rest of the state. So is there a role for hydro? I think there has to be in the short run. There are other options that are much better for the environment, certainly solar. And that's something that we and other organizations are all looking at right now, is where can we put in solar to take that burden off of, first, coal and fossil fuels, and then hopefully our rivers as well.
Anything anyone else want to add to that too?
Yeah, I would add that, to just build on what Josh said, the answer to the right balance in any one place, there's no cookie cutter approach. When people say, well, should we do something like the Penobscot project in X place? The answer is really, it depends. It depends on the location of the dam. It depends on the species. There are all kinds of things that need to be taken into account. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to engage a lot of different stakeholders and hear different opinions, because all of the people who have different perspectives and expertise are more likely to come up with a really viable and effective answer to the problem. So I think that there certainly is a future for hydropower, and not every dam needs to come out, but we need to be sensible and we need to look at what gives the best benefit.
And it's also important to recognize that the vast majority of dams don't generate power. If you were to just focus on the vast majority of dams that don't generate power and are in those lower waters of these rivers, we could open up thousands of miles of habitat. It is difficult to the extent that a lot of those dams have created lakes or ponds that people are used to. So it's hard, that's a hard thing for people to give up. But when the Edwards Dam was coming out, the doomsday was that, you were going to have 200 yards of mud to trickle in the middle, and that's not the case at all, as the photos that Laura shared with you. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. This isn't an either or on hydroelectricity. This is really about looking at what's the best use of the rivers and whether or not these old dams are of any value anymore.
Molly, anything you wanted to add there too?
Yeah, just one other thing to keep in mind, I think that's really important and was kind of a really a major lesson from the Penobscot project was just the scale at which the restoration was working towards. So it really was a watershed scale, and it wasn't just looking at a singular dam in the equation. We know by a lot of the resources that we put into monitoring both before, during, and after the Penobscot River Restoration Project and looking at fish passage in particular, that dams have a cumulative impact. So it's not just about one specific dam, it's really the culmination of all dams in a particular system. And so I think that the scale at which we approach river restoration and thinking about that cumulative dam impact for fish and fisheries is also really important, especially when we're thinking about how best to plan and how best to sort of, as in the Penobscot, rebalance hydropower and what that looks like, and not to sort of be confined to thinking about dam removal at one specific site.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or hydro.
Robbie, if
Sure.
could I make a comment, Robbie? Just on something that John Mahoney said, and that is that there's about 700 megawatts of electricity that's produced by dams in Maine. And that's not much. And it's about equal to Maine Yankee. And the vast majority of the 700 megawatts is produced by about 20 dams. So that as well as having dams that don't produce any power, we have a lot of dams that are producing a megawatt or a half a megawatt, or we have, and we need to look at that issue, as well as the issue of most of these dams were built 100 years ago, and nobody is talking about upgrading the process of hydro generation in some of these dams that were built 100 years ago. So that I think there's a real opportunity to come up with some tax benefit or something where dam owners like Brookfield Asset Management will have an incentive to try to upgrade their dams from when they were built 100 years ago.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to go into a little bit of some of these more questions, because I see that we're already running low on time with this. From Barbara Burgess, she's asking about upstream exposure of native species to downstream invasive species when smaller trim dams are removed. Could you all talk about that a little bit? Is that a concern?
I can start with that. I think on the the first thing to remember is that a lot of the species we're talking about are native anadromous fish, so they're not non-native. They were here before they were extirpated in many cases. We did run. You saw that clearly, that kind of conflict on the St. Croix River, where the state of Maine essentially closed fish passage on a dam on the St. Croix to prevent river herring from coming upstream, because of the thought that river herring competed with largemouth bass, which had been introduced as a non-native species back in the late 1800s. The data is pretty clear that alewives don't compete with bass for food, and in fact are better for the water quality further upriver because they are filter feeders, so they improve the water quality in those areas. But it is one of these issues where people are concerned about, what the changes might bring. And I think part of that is just trying to have as open and fulsome conversations with people, so that we're focused on the facts and the data. Of course, nobody wants to have one of the Asian carp species introduced, and we have to be careful about those things. But what we're really talking about is the return of the native anadromous fish species like river herring and shad and salmon and the like. Laura.
And I would add to that point too, as far as looking at non-native species getting into, for instance, our native brook trout habitats in those upper tributaries. We've been involved with an effort recently to map where are those invasive species and where are intact networks that really could be restored upstream of where those bass are mostly. And so we can double down on reconnecting those headwaters by doing things like getting rid of small dams and culverts that under roads, the pipes under roads that really block a lot of habitat, while keeping the barriers so those bass stay in the lakes and ponds where they were unfortunately introduced usually illegally beforehand. So we're getting a better handle on where they are and where they shouldn't be and how we can keep it that way.
And I would add that prevention is incredibly important. There's no question about it. We don't want really harmful invasive species in places like, way up in brook trout habitat. And so, for instance, in the Penobscot project, we did a very extensive analysis of this issue with northern pike in particular. But one thing that people should remember is that if the way that a lot of non-native species get around the state is by bucket biologists. They are taken around by as bait, or they are put in lakes and ponds and upper watersheds by people who want to catch them. It's not legal to do that, but it happens. And we know that that is the key way that it does happen. So education is really important. But let's say a pike, like in the analysis on the Penobscot, if you have a non-native potentially threatening fish that gets up in a habitat that doesn't have anything for predators to eat, except for instance, young salmon who are trying to grow up and then migrate out to sea, those predators will have nothing to eat but the endangered salmon. If there are millions and millions of young alewives up in that habitat, as I talked about in my presentation, the young salmon has a much better chance of making it out to sea and to recovering that population. So it's really a balance. I work now, in the Belgrade Lakes. It's a beautiful chain of lakes, 7 lakes in particular, and that's where pike were initially introduced and kind of cultivated as a game fish. Can that be reversed? That's a tough order. Can we keep those fish out of other places and consider it whenever we're thinking about opening up a river or stream? Sure, we can, but we need to look at the whole picture.
Molly, do you want to add anything too?
Yeah, it made me think of, Laura, you mentioned the extensive work that was done to sort of look at whether or not northern pike on the Penobscot would be a threat when the rivers were free flowing. And just sort of getting ahead of any potential invasive species through really robust scientific research and monitoring. On the Penobscot, for example, but also happening on the Kennebec and rivers elsewhere, there's been a lot of collaborative effort with researchers at, say, the University of Maine, federal and state agency, regional biologists, to really sort of take inventory and understand the baseline of the rivers, both before we're doing any sort of restoration work on the ground, and then after, so that we can not only understand how we've impacted the rivers in a positive way, hopefully, but also if there are potential threats by invasive species, then we're really putting ourselves in the best position to sort of moderate or prevent any sort of negative impacts that way. So monitoring has been a key piece, I think, in our ability to not only tell success stories of the river restoration work in Maine, but also to understand the impacts that we're having, both positive and negative, through all of this restoration work.
Great. Another question I've seen a couple folks ask about it, would just be in terms of like fish farms. Like Ann Brooks is asking, what effect would a fish farm on the Penobscot have on the river? So yeah, I'll leave that up to any of y'all to take.
Well, the prospect of a truly closed system is really exciting, to get the fish out of the bays and the natural waters, with the potential for escape being much less with these closed systems. There's still waste products, so those waste products still need to be managed, and really counting on the state to look at that very carefully in terms of getting the excess nitrogen and carbon out of those systems, so that when there is water coming out of these systems eventually, that it's treated in a way that doesn't impact the wild fisheries. It's really a much better system for food production than it would be in nets in the ocean. Again, the escape of the fish, the waste going directly into the ocean, the escape of sea lice, which has a huge impact on our native migrating salmon. but those escaped fish have a huge impact. And if we can keep them on land where they don't have the prospect of getting into the natural waters and contaminating the native population, it's a much better solution, especially when they're in these post-industrial sites that isn't taking up new lakes, ponds, or forest land.
Great. Anyone else want to chip into that as well? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the, no matter whether we're talking about a fish farm or a dam or anything else that impacts rivers, I think that we need to just remember that anything that mimics the natural process that occurred back when the only people here were the indigenous people and rivers were largely free flowing, that's going to give us a better result. And having the rivers themselves and the ocean provide the fish hatchery, so to speak, I think that is that's the best alternative. And as Josh says, if we, until and if we get to the point where that sustains our needs, then we're going to have things like fish farms, and it's just important that we're really diligent about them. But rivers are really complex. No matter what we do, the interactions are things that we need to really, we need to be very careful to understand all of the potential interactions. And one of them I think about, and not to make assumptions. So one of them that I think about is that we haven't talked about global climate change at all, but there's an assumption that dams are carbon neutral, so that taking dams out is bad in all respects with regard to global climate change. And that is not really true, because for one thing, a lot of dams in the world, their impoundments produce carbon. The second thing is fish that can't get above dams sit in warm water below dams, unable to get upstream to cooler water. And on the Penobscot, during our project, we had salmon die in exactly that way. So whether it's a fish farm or anything else, it's really important that we learn to be critical thinkers about nature. And part of that is making sure kids are exposed to the natural world, that we think about them in the most complex ways that we can, and that we stay connected to them through science, through art, through literature, by spending time in them. And so that when we're having these discussions, as other people have said, we're talking about the facts, and we can be creative, and we can find collaborative solutions together, no matter what the issue is.
Great. Anything, Sean or Molly?
There's, I would just add that there's also, separate from fish farms, thinking about the amazing successes of restoring river herring in our rivers in Maine. I mean, on the Penobscot alone, we've had nearly 3 million fish return this year. People are reconnecting to that particular species in a way that we haven't in a really long time. In thinking about, how do municipalities and individuals acquire sustainable fishing permits for a fish that's really valued in as a lobster bait in our lobster fishery. And so, fish farms are one thing, but the fish that we're restoring, the native sea-run fish, we're now providing an opportunity for local communities to really re-engage with those species and think about how we can benefit not only the fish themselves, but whole economies and local communities. So I think that's something that's also, it catches me by surprise, and it's super inspiring that we're so lucky here in Maine that when we restore rivers, when we take a dam out, we literally have fish waiting to go upstream the next day. And they're responding by the thousands and even millions in some of these river systems. And so that's really exciting as people start to really embrace what river restoration can look like in our state, and how that impacts local economies and communities statewide.
Great. I'm wondering, we've only got time for one more question, and what I really want to ask about is, so for the average person who may be watching this at home right now, I guess what would you give? What would be kind of the piece of advice you would give to them about kind of how they can kind of make their voice heard, or something like that about this issue? What would you recommend?
Vote. We have to remind everyone to vote. That's so important. And not, you know, at a local scale too, a lot of these issues are, and restoration projects and dam removals are happening at a very localized level. And so it's really important to understand what are the challenges faced by the rivers and waterways in your own community. And now, thanks to the internet and the fact that we're doing a lot more sort of virtual engagement, there are opportunities abound, just like this event right now, where people can tune in really easily from their home and learn a great deal about, you know, the state of our rivers in Maine and what, you know, how they might connect with those on a personal level and some of the things that they might do. And Josh, I hope you're ready to talk about World Fish Migration Day, because that's also a really exciting effort to sort of chime in and be a part of this work as an individual.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let Josh take that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. That comedian, I was going to follow up on Laura's comment because she mentioned that how important it is to engage our kids, our families. And I know many of us on this call love when it's springtime and we have visiting guests to be able to take them to see what this looks like in person, because it will sink into your heart and your head and you will never forget what it's like to see a restored river. So that's something that the Conservancy started this program with partners in Europe to develop a global celebration every 2 years. And there are even numbered years to celebrate the return of these rivers, to get people to understand, what can I do? First of all, learn the appreciation part is utmost. Learn how incredible it is. Share it with everybody you know. Share it with your politicians, your decision makers. Learn about it so you can speak knowledgeably about it, so that you can inform others at your town meetings, in state government, in federal elections. There are a lot of opportunities to influence policy here and around the world by being an educated citizen of the world. And that means getting in information, understanding it, having that passion in your heart, questioning information and its source when necessary, and acting on it. So spread the word. World Fish Migration Day this year is a virtual event on October 24th and October 22nd. We're having a North America event. So you can tune in online and get to see some of the work around the world and learn a little bit more so you can become a better educated voter. Sean, you might have some ideas.
The two things I would say is keep in mind what Laura said, which is that there's a different formula for each river. And that formula takes all different kinds of people. So don't get stuck in the old paradigms of, you know, enviro or not, Democrat or Republican or whatnot. It takes all types. I mean, it's got Dick Anderson on board, so you can get anybody on board. But I also, you know, so I think that that's one. The second is these take a long time. These are long projects, as anyone can tell you. 2 decades. A good close colleague of Laura's and mine, Ron Kreisman, has been doing this stuff for 3 decades. Steve Bruck, 2 decades. So you have to be patient, but always remember that rivers are resilient. And I can't echo enough. Get out and see a run in the spring. Get a tight line and remember what it's like to really, you know, catch a beautiful brook trout and let it go, or to see those fish, because that's what's really inspiring about this. And the last piece is to vote. If we don't have good water quality standards, which comes from the legislature, none of this happens. So part of it is, you know, really voting and voting with that in mind. What do you feel about as far as the water quality standards for, if you're in Yarmouth, the Royal River? If you're in Brunswick, the Androscoggin, where are you on those things? So,
and Laura, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to participate, because this was really wonderful. And I hope that if there's one thing that people take with them, is that if you can envision how to, you know, solve a problem, bring back your river, your lake, your, you know, anything that you really care about. I think these lessons from rivers will stand you in good stead. You know, involve partners, think critically, look at the facts, look for balance, and there's an awful lot that we can do together. And if you want to see the evidence of that, visit a river in the springtime in Maine, and the Penobscot or the Kennebec or the Presumpscot. There are a number of them now. We're fortunate, and it'll inspire you to do just about anything.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you to the rest of our panelists today. And then I'd also love to just thank our sponsors again, the Nature Conservancy in Maine, the Maine Education Association, the Maine Mathematics and Science Alliance, and then our members here at Maine Public. And I'd just like to remind everybody that our third and final lecture in the series, it is next Thursday, October 8th at noon, and that's with Dr. Heather M. Leslie. She's the director of the Darling Marine Center at the University of Maine, and her topic are Maine's Ocean, how science is powering resilience for coastal ecosystems and communities. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope to see you all next week. And thank you all again. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.